it's Reagan, and today I'm here to do my seasonal review video. That's right, I'm gonna be chatting about my top 5 favorite books I read this fall. In this video, I'm gonna show off every single book I read this fall, give the general star rating, and then select my favorite books of the past season. Per usual, I will have my wrap-ups from this season down below if you want to see more in-depth thoughts for all of the books, but without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right into the month of September. First book I completed in September was City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I completed 2 Dark Reigns by Kendar Blake, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. I also read The Queen of Fenburn by Kendar Blake as well, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars too. Bae, love this series. Lastly, for the month of September, I read And the Ocean Was Our Sky by Patrick Ness and illustrated by Ravana Kai, which I gave like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now moving on to the month of October, the first book I completed was Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And I read Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars to. Then I completed The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, which I also gave a 5 out of 5 stars to. And then lastly, for the month of October, I completed Vicious by Victoria Schwab, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Moving on now to the month of November, the first book I completed was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars to. And I read Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Until the Last Star Fades by Jacqueline Middleton, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Vengeful by V.E. Schwab, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I completed Shadow of Self by Brandon Sanderson, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I read Thickesthesis by Megan Wallen Turner, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars to. So those are all of the books I read throughout the fall season. Again, I will have all wrap-ups linked down below, but now let's move on to my top 5 books, which, I'm gonna be honest, was really hard to narrow down. I just read a lot of really amazing Brandon Sanderson, and I feel like I could honestly make this top 5 just talking about the 5 Brandon Sanderson books I read, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna talk about a variety, though I do love Brandon Sanderson. Actually, because this is so difficult, I'm not going to include the Stormlight Archives 3rd book, even though that's probably my favorite book I read this season, but I included the first 2 in my last seasonal wrap-up, and I feel like that one's kind of a given. So to talk about some new favorites, I'm going to keep that one out of it and just chat about one Brandon Sanderson book. But anyway, let's talk about it. So my first favorite is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which I actually have a non-spoiler review for, which I will also leave linked down below. But this book completely 100% took me by surprise. I don't know why it took me so long to pick up this novel, but it was incredible and honestly one of my favorite Brandon Sanderson books of all time. This is a fantasy story that I believe is having another book come out, but it basically follows 2 sisters that have grown up in this very austere kingdom. They were grown up and taught that magic is evil and that wearing kind of dull, more reserved colors is the approach. And they've both grown up knowing that the older sister was always to be married off to a neighboring competing kingdom when she comes of age to a very powerful figure called the God King. However, at the beginning of this novel, the younger sister is sent away instead, and we basically follow both sisters as one, the younger sister kind of breaks into this new political life and tries to find any type of ground and bearing as her whole world has been turned upside down, as well as the older sister who leaves their kingdom to try to save her younger sister. I love this book so much. It is one of the most creative political, magic, and religious systems I've ever come across in a fantasy novel. The magic system in this book is centered around the concepts of breaths. Every individual has 1 breath. However, people can have more than 1 if they're freely given by someone else. The more breaths you have, the more powerful you are. Colors become more rich, and you also have the ability to animate inanimate objects like sticks and fabric and things like that, and that's how the magic system works, and it's so creative. This novel has probably one of the most interesting mysteries. Aside from having the 2 sister perspectives, we also follow another god who is within the God King's court, and he kind of acts as like the detective. This book is full of so many mysteries and turns. I loved reading from the 2 sisters' perspectives. You see them grow in very different ways, but their love for each other is always there. Anyway, this book was amazing, 5 out of 5 stars. It's actually free in ebook form, so I would definitely check this out if you haven't read it already. Next up, I have Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is the sequel to Nevermore, which I read last year and loved, and honestly, I think I liked this sequel even more than the first one, which I feel like is really saying something because I loved the first one. But this is an incredible middle grade fantasy novel that fills my heart with so much nostalgia of magic and love. It gives me Harry Potter vibes without being anything like Harry Potter. It's more that it just kind of like makes me feel similar, if that makes sense. But this follows our main character Morgan Crow, who is cursed. She's been told her whole life that every bad thing that befalls not just her, but everyone around her is her fault. And she's most of all blamed for the curse that says she will die on the eve of her 11th birthday. On the eve of her 11th birthday, she is swept away to a new magical place called Nevermore by a person called Jupiter North, who is the owner of this very magical hotel that is kind of like the Grand Budapest Hotel, but like on magical steroids. The first one follows Morgan as she joins the trials to enter the secret society, so it has like this magical competition element, but the sequel has a magical school element, and I loved every freaking second of it. It's just like has so much wonder and whimsy and friendship and adventure and mystery. It's amazing. And I also really feel like the author packs in a lot of life lessons and like trials and tribulations we have to see Morgan go through, but like you're rooting for her the whole time and nothing is like conventional. It's just a perfect book and it's so clever and I love this world so much. The next book I have to talk about is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This is the sequel to The Bear and the Nightingale and another just amazing fantasy novel. Again, another sequel that I think I love more than the first one. This is a historical fantasy novel set in the like 15th, 16th century Russia. We follow a young girl who in the first one has like folklore magic, but when her mother passes away and her father remarries a very devout religious woman, she vows to banish all folklore practices from the town. But when this begins to occur, evil begins to creep out of the forest that neighbors the area. This book will make you feel cold to your core. First novel in this series really showed our main character Vasilia coming to age and like first discovering her powers, while the sequel shows her like in full adventure. We see her, you know, cross a large section of Russia, but the thing that I love most about this series is it takes this historical context very, very seriously. A lot of the, I guess you could say, like expectations that Vasilia breaks by being very much out of societal norm as a woman during this time period is explored to the most realistic way possible, even with a fantasy setting. Her siblings who love her are very worried about her because she could literally be executed, but also themselves and their families because they could also be banished because of their sister's actions. I loved this book so much. I feel like it is such a perfect blend of historical fiction and fantasy together and just an amazing series. The third one comes out really, really soon and I cannot wait. Next up, we have Vengeful by V.E. Schwab, which is yet again another sequel, the first one being Vicious. This is a continuation of one of my favorite books ever, and I'm so happy to say I was not disappointed by this at all. This is a world where people with extraordinary powers exist. Essentially, our main characters Eli and Victor in college, who were best friends turned arch nemesis of each other, became obsessed with figuring out how individuals could gain powers, and they discovered it was through near-death experiences. The first one, which was incredibly dark, had quite a complex set of sequences that the sequel just jumped off perfectly from. I was actually very nervous initially picking up this book, but I feel like Victoria Schwab did a wonderful job continuing the story in the near future of where the last one took off. She also does a great job with basically like rewriting your expectations and feelings about all sorts of characters. It's an emotional, confusing time in this book. You love and hate everyone. It's a lot. It's also just fascinating and a very interesting exploration of, you know, people who aren't the best, like their motivations. It's kind of a screwed up book, but I love it. It's like X-Men, but everyone's like not a good person, like not really a superhero, you know what I mean? It's amazing. And the last book I have to talk about is Thickesthesis by Megan Mullen Turner. This is the 5th book to the Thief series by Megan Mullen Turner, which is one of my favorite series of all time. And this book did not disappoint. This is a fantasy series that's set in kind of an ancient Greek world. The first 4 books take place on this sort of like ancient Greece side of this setting. They're all part of neighboring city-states that have very complex political maneuverings against each other, but they live in the same place. This one takes place in Mead, which is kind of the Persia of this reworking of history. We follow our main character, Kamat, who is a very high-ranking slave in Mead. We follow him having to escape his empire to basically flee execution, and he travels with the character we encounter in the 4th book, and it's just an amazing journey story. It's literally just them traveling from point A to point B and all of the things that they encounter along the way. Megan Mallon Turner just makes you love characters in ways that I can't describe. She also tricks you to no end. Like, she writes some of the most clever dialogue and clever plots that just are like so subtle that you don't notice until you were just 100% duped. And then at the end of it, you get to the reveal, you're like, how did she trick me so bad? How did I get here and not realize that I just had no idea what was going on? That's what makes her book so amazing, because you're just along for the ride. You're like one of the characters in this book that is just like completely ignorant to what's going on around them. That's you, or at least it's me. Anyway, loved this novel so much. I am sad but excited for the next one that is coming out, which I believe is the last one in the series. But this was an incredible 5th novel, just like all of the other ones were incredible installations of this series as well. So I had to chat about it. Alrighty guys, those are the top 5 books I read this fall. Let me know down below some books you've read recently that you've loved, as I would love to know. And I'll see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!